Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today, we are reading again from Robinson Crusoe, and let me see what chapter we are on. I apologize. We're on the second half of chapter 13, Deliverance. They helloed again and called their two comrades by their names, but got no answer. After some time, we could see by the little light there was that they were running about like men in despair. Sometimes they would go and sit down in the boat to rest themselves. Then they would come on shore again and walk about. My men would have fallen upon them in the dark, but I was willing to spare them and kill as few of them as I could. I was unwilling to risk the killing of any of our men, knowing that the others were well armed. I resolved to wait and make sure of them, and drew my ambuscade nearer. I ordered Friday and the captain to creep upon their hands and knees and get as near them as they possibly could before they offered to fire. They had not been long in that position when the boatswain, who was the principal ringleader and had not shown himself the most dispirited of all the rest, walked toward them with two more of their crew. The captain was so eager at having the principal rogue so much in his power that he could hardly have patience to let him come near enough to be sure of him, for he had only heard his voice before. When they came nearer, the captain and Friday, starting up on their feet, let fly at him. The boatswain was killed on the spot, the next was shot through the body and fell just by him, though he did not die till an hour or two after, and the third ran for it. At the noise of the fire, I immediately advanced with my whole army, which was now 8 men. I myself, Generalissimo, Friday, my lieutenant general, the captain and his 2 men, the 3 prisoners of war whom we had trusted with arms. We came upon them indeed in the dark, so that they could not see our number. I made the man that they had left in the boat, who was now one of us, call them by name, to see if he could bring them to parley, which fell out just as we desired. He called out as loud as he could to one of them, "Tom Smith! Tom Smith!" Tom Smith answered immediately, "Is that Robinson?" For it seems that he knew his voice. The other answered, "Aye, aye, for God's sake, Tom Smith, throw down your arms and yield, or you are all dead men this moment." Whom must we yield to? Where are they?" says Tom Smith again. "Here they are," says he. "Here is our captain, and 50 men with him have been hunting you this 2 hours. The boatswain is killed, Will Fry is wounded, and I am a prisoner. If you do not yield, you are all lost." "If they will give us quarter then," said Tom Smith, "we will yield." "I'll go and ask if you promise to yield," says Robinson. So he asked the captain, and the captain himself then called out, "You, Smith, you know my voice. If you lay down your arms immediately and submit, you shall all have your lives, all but Will Atkins." Upon this, Will Atkins cried out, "For God's sake, Captain, give me quarter. What have I done? They have all been as bad as I." This was not true, for it seems that this Will Atkins was the first man that laid hold of the captain when they first mutinied. However, the captain told him that he must lay down his arms at discretion and trust to the governor's mercy. By this he meant me, for they called me governor. In a word, they all laid down their arms and begged their lives. I sent the man that had parleyed with them, and 2 more who bound them all. Then my great army of 50 men, which with those 3 were in all but 8, came up and seized them all in their boat. I kept myself and 1 more out of sight for reasons of state. Our next work was to repair the boat and to think of seizing the ship. The captain, now that he had leisure to parley with them, expostulated with them upon the villainy of their practices with him, and how certainly it must bring them to misery and distress in the end, and perhaps to the gallows. They all appeared very penitent and begged hard for their lives. As for that, he told them that the governor was an Englishman, and that he might hang them all there if he pleased. However, since he had given them quarter, he supposed he would send them to England, except Atkins, whom he was commanded by the governor to advise to prepare for death, because he would be hanged in the morning. Though this was all a fiction of his own, yet it had the desired effect. Atkins fell upon his knees to beg the captain to intercede with the governor for his life, and all the rest begged of him for God's sake not to be sent to England. It now occurred to me that the time of our deliverance had come, and that it would be a most easy thing to make these fellows help in getting possession of the ship. So I retired in the dark from them, that they might not see what kind of governor they had, and called the captain to me. When I called, as at a good distance, one of the men was ordered to speak again and to say to the captain, "Captain, the commander calls for you." And presently the captain replied, "Tell his excellency I am just coming." So they all believed that the commander was just by with his 50 men. Upon the captain's coming to me, I told him my project for seizing the ship, which pleased him. We resolved to put it in execution the next morning. But in order to execute it with more art, and to be sure of success, I told him that we must divide the prisoners, and that he should go and take Atkins and 2 more of the worst of them, and send them bound to the cave where the others lay. So Friday and the 2 men who came on shore with the captain conveyed them to the cave as to a prison. The others I ordered to my bower, where they were bound and left secure enough. To these, in the morning, I sent the captain, who was to enter into a parley with them, to try them and tell me whether he thought they might be trusted or not to go on board and surprise the ship. He talked to them of the injury done him and of the condition they were brought to. He reminded them that though the governor had given them quarter for their lives as to the present action, yet if they were sent to England they would all be hanged in chains. He ended by telling them that if they would join in so just an attempt as to recover the ship, he would have the governor's promise for their pardon. Anyone may guess how readily such a proposal would be accepted by men in their condition. They fell down on their knees to the captain and promised with solemn vows that they would be faithful to him to the last drop, and that they would owe their lives to him and would go with him all over the world, and would own him for a father as long as they lived. Well, says the captain, I must go and tell the governor what you say and see what I can do to bring him to consent to it. So he brought me an account of the temper he found them in, and that he verily believed they would be faithful. However, that we might be very secure, I told him he should go back again and choose out 5 of them, and tell them that they should see he did not want men, but that he would take out those 5 to be his assistants, and that the governor would keep the other 2 and the 3 that were sent prisoners to the castle, my cave, as hostages for the fidelity of those 5. If they proved unfaithful in the execution, the 5 hostages should be hanged in chains alive upon the shore. This looked severe and convinced them that the governor was in earnest. However, they had no way left them but to accept it, and it was now the business of the prisoners as much as of the captain to persuade the other 5 to do their duty. Our strength was now thus ordered for the expedition. First, the captain, his mate, and the passenger. Second, the 2 prisoners of the first gang, to whom, having their characters from the captain, I had given their liberty, and whom I had trusted with arms. Third, the other 2, whom I had kept bound in my bower, who were now released. Fourth, these 5, just released. There were 12 in all, besides the 5 whom we kept in the cave as hostages for the fidelity of the others. I asked the captain if he was willing to venture with those hands on board the ship. As for me and my man Friday, I did not think it proper for us to stir, having 7 men left behind. It was employment enough for us to keep them apart and supply them with victuals. As to the 5 in the cave, I resolved to keep them fast, but Friday went twice a day to them to supply them with necessaries. I made the other 2 carry provisions to a certain distance where Friday was to take it. When I showed myself to the 2 hostages, it was with the captain, who told them that I was the person whom the governor had ordered to look after them, and that it was the governor's pleasure they should not stir anywhere but by my direction. If they did, they should be brought to the castle and be laid in irons. In that way we never suffered them to see me as governor. I appeared as another person, and spoke of the governor, the garrison, the castle, and the like upon all occasions. The captain now had no difficulty before him but to furnish his 2 boats, stop the breach of one, and man them. He made his passenger captain of one, with 4 other men. He himself, with his mate and 5 more, went in the other. They contrived their business very well, for they came up to the ship about midnight. As soon as they came within call of the ship, he made Robinson hail them and tell them that he had brought off the men and the boat, but that it was a long time before they had found them. He held them in chat till they came to the ship's side, when the captain and the mate, entering first with their arms, immediately knocked down the second mate and the carpenter with the butt end of their muskets, being very faithfully seconded by their men. They secured all the rest that were upon the main and quarter decks, and began to fasten the hatches to keep them down who were below, when the men from the other boat, entering the forechains, secured the forecastle of the ship, and the scuttle which went down into the cook room, making 3 men they found there prisoners. When this was done, and all safe upon the deck, the captain ordered the mate with 3 men to break into the roundhouse where the new rebel captain lay. He, having taken alarm and gotten up, now stood with 2 men and a boy, having firearms in their hands. When the mate with a crowbar split open the door, the new captain and his men fired boldly among them, and wounded the mate with a musket ball, which broke his arm, and wounded 2 more of the men, but killed nobody. The mate, calling for help, rushed, however, into the roundhouse, wounded as he was, and with his pistol shot the new captain through the head. The bullet entered his mouth and came out again behind one of his ears, so that he never spoke a word again. Upon this, the rest yielded, and the ship was taken effectually without any more lives lost. As soon as the ship was thus secured, the captain ordered 7 guns to be fired, which was a signal agreed upon with me to give me notice of his success, which you may be sure I was glad to hear. I had sat watching upon the shore for it till 2 o'clock in the morning. Having heard the signal plainly, I laid me down, and being very much fatigued, I fell sound asleep. Shortly, I was awakened by the noise of a gun, and starting up, I heard a man call me by the name of Governor, and presently I knew the captain's voice. I climbed up to the top of the hill, and there he stood. Pointing to the ship, he embraced me in his arms. "My dear friend and deliverer," said he, "there's your ship, for she is all yours, and so are we, and all that belongs to her." I cast my eyes to the ship, and there she rode about half a mile off the shore, for they had weighed her anchor as soon as they were masters of her, and the weather being fair had brought her to an anchor just against the mouth of a little creek. The tide being up, they had brought the pinnace in near the place where I had first landed my rafts, and so landed just at my door. I was, at first, ready to sink down with surprise, for I saw my deliverance indeed visibly put into my hands, all things easy, and a large ship just ready to carry me away whither I pleased to go. He perceived my situation, and immediately pulled a bottle out of his pocket and gave me a dram of cordial which he had brought on purpose for me. After I drank it, I sat down upon the ground, and it was a good while before I could speak to him. After some time I came to myself, and then I embraced him in my turn as my deliverer, and we rejoiced together. I told him that I looked upon him as a man sent from heaven to deliver me, and that the whole transaction seemed to be a chain of wonders. Such things as these were the testimonies we had of a secret hand of providence governing the world, and an evidence that the eyes of an infinite power could search into the remotest corner of the world and send help to the miserable whenever he pleased. I did not forget to return thanks to God for all his mercies. When we had talked a little, the captain told me that he had brought me some little refreshment, such as the ship afforded, and such as the wretches, who had been so long his masters, had not plundered him of. Upon this, he called aloud to his men, and told them to bring the things ashore that were for the governor, and it was a splendid present. First, he had brought me a case of bottles full of cordial waters, six large bottles of Madeira wine, 2 pounds of excellent tobacco, 12 good pieces of the ship's beef, and 6 pieces of pork with a bag of peas, and about 100 weight of biscuit. He brought me also a box of sugar, a box of flour, a bag full of lemons, and 2 bottles of lime juice, and an abundance of other things. But besides these, and what was 1,000 times more useful to me, he brought me 6 clean new shirts, 6 very good neckcloths, 2 pairs of gloves, 1 pair of shoes, a hat, 1 pair of stockings, and a very good suit of clothes of his own, which had been worn very little. I can assure you that the clothes felt very awkward and uneasy upon me at first. After all these things were brought into my little apartment, we began to consult what was to be done with the prisoners we had, and whether we might venture to take them away with us or not, especially 2 of them whom we knew to be incorrigible and refractory to the last degree. The captain said that he knew that they were such rogues that there was no trusting them. If he did carry them away, it must be in irons as malefactors to be delivered over to justice at the first English colony he could come to. Upon this, I told him I would undertake to bring the 2 men he spoke of, to make it their own request that he should leave them upon the island, of which the captain said he should be very glad. I accordingly sent for them, and entered seriously into discourse with them upon their circumstances. One of them answered in the name of the rest that they had nothing to say but this, that when they were taken, the captain promised them their lives, and they humbly implored my mercy. But I told them that I knew not what mercy to show them, for as for myself, I had resolved to quit the island with all my men, and had taken passage with the captain to go to England. The captain would not carry them to England, except as prisoners in irons to be tried for mutiny and running away with the ship. The consequence of this, they must needs know, would be the gallows. I could not tell which was best for them, unless they had a mind to take their fate in the island. If they desired that, as I had liberty to leave the island, I had some inclination to give them their lives, as if they could shift on shore. They seemed very thankful for it, and said that they would rather venture to stay there than to be carried to England to be hanged. I then told them that I would let them into the story of my living there, and put them into the way of making it easy for them. Accordingly, I gave them the whole history of the place, and of my coming to it. I showed them my fortifications, the way I made my bread, planted my corn, cured my grapes, and in a word, all that was necessary to make it easy for them. I told them the story of the Spaniards that were to be expected, for whom I left a letter, and made them promise to treat them in common with themselves. I left them 5 muskets, 3 fowling pieces, and 3 swords. I had about 1.5 barrels of powder, which I left them. I gave them a description of the way I managed the goats, and directions to milk and fatten them, to make both butter and cheese. In a word, I gave them every part of my own story. I told them that I would prevail with the captain to leave them 2 barrels of gunpowder more, and some garden seeds, which I told them I would have been very glad of. Also, I gave them the bag of peas which the captain had brought me, and bade them be sure to sow and increase them. Having done this, I left them the next day and went on board the ship. The next morning, 2 of the 5 men came swimming to the ship's side, and making a most lamentable complaint of the other 3, begged to be taken into the ship for God's sake, for they should be murdered. The captain pretended to have no power without me, but after some difficulty and after their solemn promises of amendment, they were taken on board and were soundly whipped, after which they proved very honest and quiet fellows. Some time after this, I went with the boat on shore, the tide being up, with the things promised to the men, with which the captain, at my intercession, sent their chests and clothes, which they were very thankful for. I also encouraged them by telling them that if it lay in my way to send any vessel to take them in, I would not forget them. When I quitted this island, I carried on board for relics the great goatskin cap I had made, my umbrella, and one of my parrots. Also, I did not forget to take the money I had laid by me so long useless. And thus I left the island the 19th of December, by the ship's account, in the year 1686, after I had been upon it 28 years, 2 months, and 19 days. I was delivered from the second captivity the same day of the month that I had made my escape from among the Moors at Sallee. In this vessel, after a long voyage, I arrived in England the 11th of June in the year 1687, having been 35 years absent. When I came to England, I was as perfect a stranger as if I had never been known there. My benefactor and faithful steward, with whom I had left my money in trust, was still alive, but had had great misfortunes in the world. She had become a widow the second time, and was in very low circumstances. I made her easy as to what she owed me, assuring her that I would give her no trouble. On the contrary, in gratitude to her former care and faithfulness to me, I relieved her as much as my little stock would afford, which at that time would allow me to do but little for her. I assured her that I would never forget her former kindness to me, nor did I forget her when I had sufficient to help her at a later time. I went down afterwards into Yorkshire, but my father was dead, and my mother and all the family extinct, except 2 sisters and 2 of the children of one of my brothers. And as I had been long ago given over for dead, there had been no provision made for me, so that, in a word, I found nothing to relieve or assist me, and the little money I had would not do much for me when it came to settling in the world. I met with one piece of gratitude indeed, which I did not expect. The master of the ship, whom I had so happily delivered, gave a very handsome account to the owners of the manor in which I had saved the lives of the men and the ship. Accordingly, they invited me to meet them and some other merchants concerned, and altogether they made me a very handsome compliment upon the subject, and a present of almost 200 pounds sterling. But after I had reflected upon the circumstances of my life, and how little way this would go towards settling me in the world, I resolved to go to Lisbon, and see if I could get any information of the state of my plantation in the Brazils, and of what had become of my partner, who I supposed had for some years now given me up for dead. With this view, I took shipping for Lisbon, where I arrived the following April. My man Friday accompanied me very honestly in all these ramblings, and proved a most faithful servant upon all occasions. When I came to Lisbon, I found by inquiry, and to my particular satisfaction, my old friend, the captain of the ship, who first took me up at sea off the shore of Africa. He had grown old and had left the sea. His son now captained the ship, and still carried on the Brazil trade. The old man did not know me, and I scarcely knew him, but he soon recollected me when I told him who I was. After some passionate expressions of our old acquaintance, I inquired after my plantation and my partner. The old man told me that he had not been in the Brazils for about 9 years, but that he could assure me that when he came away, my partner was living, but the trustees, whom I had appointed with him to watch over my part, were both dead. However, he believed that I should have a very good account of the improvement of the plantation. In the general belief of my being cast away and drowned, my trustees had given in the account of the procedure of my plantation to the procurator fiscal, who had appropriated it, in case I never came to claim it, 1/3 to the king and 2/3 to the monastery of St. Augustine, to be expended for the benefit of the poor and for the conversion of the Indians to the Catholic faith. If I appeared, or anyone for me, to claim the inheritance, it would be restored, except the improvement or annual production, which, as he said, had been distributed to charitable uses, and he thought could not be restored. I was a little concerned and uneasy at this account, and inquired of the old captain how it came to pass that the trustees should thus dispose of my effects, when they knew that I had made my will, and made him, the Portuguese captain, my universal heir. He told me that that was true, but as there was no proof of my being dead, he could not act as executor until some certain account should come of my death. Besides, he was not willing to intermeddle with a thing so remote. It was true that he had registered my will and put in his claim, and could he have given any account of my being dead or alive, he would have acted by procuration and taken possession of my ingenio, the sugar house, and given his son, who was now in the Brazils, orders to do it. The old man then asked me if he should tell me how to make my claim to the plantation. I told him that I thought to go over to it myself. He said that I might do so if I pleased, but that if I did not, there were ways enough to secure my right and immediately to appropriate the profits to myself. As there were ships in the river of Lisbon just ready to go to the Brazils, he made me enter my name in a public register, with his affidavit affirming upon oath that I was alive, and that I was the same person who took up the land for planting the said plantation at first. This being regularly attested by a notary and a procuration affixed, he directed me to send it with a letter of his writing to a merchant of his acquaintance at the place. He then proposed my staying with him till an account came of the return. Never was anything more honorable than the proceedings upon this procuration. In less than 7 months, I received a large packet from the survivors of my trustees, the merchants for whose account I went to sea, and as the Brazil ships all come in fleets, the same ships which brought my letters brought my goods, and the effects were safe in the Tagus before the letters came to my hands. By these it appeared that I was now master all of a sudden of more than 5,000 pounds sterling in money, and had an estate, as I might call it, in the Brazils, which brought in more than 1,000 pounds a year, as safe as any landed estate in England. In a word, I was in a condition which I could scarcely understand, and I did not know how to compose myself for its enjoyment. The first thing I did was to recompense my original benefactor, my good old captain, who had been charitable to me in my distress, kind to me in the beginning, and honest to me at the end. I showed him all that was sent me. I told him that next to the providence of heaven, which disposes all things, it was owing to him, and that it now lay on me to reward him. So I sent for a notary, and caused him to draw a procuration, empowering the captain to be my receiver of the annual profits of my plantation, and appointing my partner to account to him and make the returns by the usual fleets to him in my name. I added a clause at the end making a grant of 100 moidores a year to him during his life, and 50 moidores a year to his son after him for his life. Thus I requited my old man. After a time, I returned to England and took my 2 nephews, the children of one of my brothers, into my care. The elder, having something of his own, I brought up as a gentleman, and gave him a settlement of some addition to his estate after my decease. The other I put out to the captain of a ship, and after 5 years, finding him a sensible, bold, enterprising young fellow, I put him into a good ship and sent him to sea. And this young fellow afterwards drew me in, old as I was, to farther adventures myself. In the meantime, I in part settled myself here, for first of all I married and had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. Friday lived with me, and we never forgot our days upon the island. For many years the sea called to me day and night, and often I longed for new adventures. Thus I have given the first part of a life of fortune and adventure, a life of Providence's checker work, and of a variety which the world will seldom be able to show the like of. It began foolishly, but it closed much more happily than any part of it ever gave me leave so much as to hope for. That is the end of our story. Thank you so much for listening. We'll start next time with a brand new book. Bye-bye.